Hello and welcome ladies and gentlemen, my name is Crash and today I have 5 manga that I think you guys should read. This came from a suggestion from friends who wanted me to talk about some underrated shonen. Now this isn't exactly what they asked, I think they wanted battle shonen recommendations and maybe I'll do that in a future time, but for now we have this. 5 manga from Weekly Shounen Jump that I think are not necessarily underrated, but at the very least not as talked about or as read as the juggernauts of the magazine. This list is far from being my top 5 manga from the magazine. They simply are manga I think are good, but have been forgotten either by time or just by the amount of manga in the magazine. Now, only one of these is cancelled, so the others had decent success during their runs, so there's of course a chance that you know and read all of these manga, but I'm willing to bet most of you have not. Also, this list does not contain any manga that has been released post Manga Plus. Those series are very recent and they are so accessible that they get talked about as soon as chapter 1 is released. Though if I can make a shout out, which I can, the video is mine, I will just say that there's 3 cancelled gag manga that I think are underappreciated, and those are Teenage Renaissance David-kun, Mitama Security, and of course, A Gravity Boys. With those out of the way, we're going to start with probably the most well-known out of the bunch. The one in the thumbnail, it is Majin Tantei Nougami Neuro from Yusei Matsui. Now, Neuro was a big success when it was released. It lasted for 4 years, from 2005 to 2009. It counted 23 volumes, which is a pretty decent run. Not the biggest on the list, but very close to it. It had a 25-episode anime adaptation in 2007, and it had 2 video game tie-ins as well, one for the Nintendo DS and another for the PlayStation 2, not to mention a light novel and 2 audio dramas. That's a pretty good run, even for Shounen Jump's high standards, but I think Matsui's next work completely overshadowed Neuro. Assassination Classroom released in 2012, and for comparison, by the end of its run Neuro had sold 4.4 million copies. That's a pretty good number and one of the best selling manga of its time. But Assassination Classroom had sold over 20 million. And I understand. I think S-Class is a bit more polished, especially in terms of art style, which is indeed the worst part of Neuro, but overall I still like Neuro more. Now, the plot of the story as our titular character, Nero moved from the demon world to our world because he feeds on solving puzzles and mysteries, and he just solved all there was to solve in his world. He tries not to stand out much, so he uses Yako, a high school girl, the same way Detective Conan uses the detective guy to solve his cases. And Detective Conan is a decent comparison to the first half of Nero, except Matsui injects the genre with doses of comedy, horror and absurdity to create something so uniquely his that nothing really compares. For me, there's 2 main reasons to read Nero. First is Nero himself. He's just so fun to watch and so different from your typical shonen hero. This guy is evil. His hobby is to torture Yaku and everyone that comes his way, and he's clearly the most powerful being around, so it's not like anyone can say anything about it. His relationship with Yaku obviously does grow as the manga goes on in a very organic way, which is always appreciated. The other character we should talk about is X, or Sai, the first main villain that appears in the series. I cannot say much about them because what I really like about Sai is the things we get to learn of them. The character is introduced as a serial killer whose methods of killing is to completely turn them into buckets of blood without wasting a single drop. The reason why Sai does that is really one of the most interesting things of the manga, so I'll let you guys discover that on your own. Now, it is true that the art style is a bit crude. The mangaka would only improve his style in his next manga, and I also admit that there's a bit of a drop in quality in the second half as the manga turns more and more into a battle series, but I still think it's very much worth the read. And with Matsui having just released his new manga, now more than ever is a perfect time to go back and see how he started. The next manga is actually associated with Nero, which was one of the main reasons why I read it. Both manga came out in the mid-2000s, both had a mix of mystery, supernatural, horror and comedy, and that led to a couple of collaborations between the authors. I'm talking of course of Muhyo and Rouji's Bureau of Supernatural Investigation. This manga was released between 2004 and 2008 by Yoshiyuki Nishi with a total of 18 volumes. It had some success during its run, and contrary to Nero, it was even translated and published in English by Viz. As a matter of fact, it is completely available to read in the Shounen Jump app, so if you have that, there's absolutely no reason not to read this one. This series didn't have an anime during its run, but in 2018, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the ending of the series, we did eventually get one, with the second season having been released last year. It also received a 2-volume sequel in Shounen Jump Plus between 2018 and 2019. Yet, even with all this very recent promo, I still don't see many people talking about Muhyo and Rouji. The story is about the duo of Muhyo and Rouji, an exorcist and his assistant, as they exorcise spirits in a pretty fun battle shonen. It's very much the predecessor to a lot of recent series that have graced the magazines recently, but it's nowhere more visible than in Phantom Seer, which takes a lot of elements from this series. Now, the story of Muhyo and Rouji does start as an episodic series to introduce the characters and the mechanics of using envoys, which are creatures the exorcists have contracts with, to exorcise spirits, the concept of the exorcising laws, and etc. But the story does start to appear from volume 2 and onwards, and this is when it really shines. While there are various arcs, there is one overarching story about Muhyo and his childhood friend and main antagonist, Enshu, and everything that happens is neatly related to that main story. The weakest point of Muhyo and Rouji is the battles themselves. They are visually beautiful, the creatures just look great, but if you're someone that likes depth in your fights or your power system, this lacks a bit in that aspect. I don't think it's too bad, and if you're into it for the characters or story, I think you'll have lots of fun with it. As for the final 3-digit long manga of this list, we have Rookies. Rookies was written by Masanori Morita, who's more well known for the major hit title Rokudenashi Blues, often considered among the very best the delinquent genre has to offer. Rookies was released 10 years later, in 1998, and was published until 2003, counting 24 volumes. It is the longest manga in this list, and while this manga never got an anime adaptation, it did have some live-action ones. The TV drama of the same name was released in 2008, and a movie, which served as its finale, was released the next year. There was also one shot to celebrate the movie, which is a nice little extra to read after you're done with the series. Now, this is a sports manga from the late 90s, and you can bet that means it has Slam Dunk as a major inspiration. Rookies is Slam Dunk if Slam Dunk was about baseball and everyone in the team was Sakuragi. It's called Rookies for a reason. We start the manga with a mess of a baseball team. Every member is a first-year violent delinquent who drove any and all actual players out of the team. Not that it matters, as the team was kicked out of the competition for a year for having started a fight mid-game. Everyone has lost hope for its members, well, everyone except our main character, Kawato. His transfer teacher makes his mission to reform the students by giving them a new goal in life. One of the most interesting things in Rookies from the get-go is the fact that this is a sports manga where our main character is not a player but the coach, which brings a different dynamic in the team, because while there is one player that is obviously better than the rest, none of them really do feel like the central character. Every player is equally important in their narrative. Of course, Rookies is not so much a manga about baseball games as it is about personal growth. This means that the majority of the manga is going to be spent outside of these games, and the first one really only starts more than 50 chapters into the story. This makes tons of sense, because the first 50 chapters of the manga are heavily focused on learning who these people are, why they are like this, and how Kawato can help them love the sport that they don't care about at first. The goal of winning the natural tournament is very similar to pretty much every other sports manga and anime, but while there it represents a reward for all the hard work the characters put into their goals, in Rookies it represents more of a statement of these characters saying, we are no longer who we were before, we are changed men and better people. Kawato is also one of my favorite characters overall. He's the kind of paternal figure I want to be and a great role model, someone who never leaves a student behind. The last thing I'll say is that I made this video because I spent the majority of last month reading this manga and absolutely loved it, and I want to talk about it, so please read it. The next manga we'll be talking about is by a mangaka I really like. Mizuki Kawashiro has written a decent amount of rom-coms, with her most famous one being Ichigo 100%, one of the best well-received manga of its genre during its run. Now, Ichigo 100% is a manga that is easily put on my top 10 overall Jump manga, but we're not here to talk about that. On the back of the success of Ichigo 100%, Kawashiro wrote Hatsukoi Limited in 2007. With only 33 chapters and 4 volumes, this is the shortest manga in this list, and I know those numbers tend to be in one thing and one thing only when it comes to Jump manga. This is one of the very few cases where the manga was always intended to be nothing but a short run in the magazine. Proof of this is the anime adaptation it got in 2009, followed by a short OVA in the same year. Now, this is going to sound very weird, but Hatsukoi Limited reminds me a lot of Inio Asano's What a Wonderful World. Not necessarily in the contents of the story, those are of course completely different, but on the fact that both of them are comprised of short stories, each of them with their own main character, but are related to the others that came before. As we go through the story, we get to meet and learn characters that were just side characters of previous chapters, as we slowly get a bigger picture of the school and of course the entire romantic connections of all of them. This is also one of the very few shonen rom-coms where we get to see a central female character, and Kawashiro, being a female writer, does make her have a bit of advantage while writing these chapters. Overall, this is an enjoyable read with fun characters and great art, and all the while being pretty short. But if you do read it, liked it, and wanted more, then Ichigo 100% is most definitely your next step. And finally, the last manga of this list is both the most recent and the least popular. It's called Magico, and it was written by Naoki Iwamoto in 2011. The manga was sadly cancelled in 2012, but it did have about a year and a half running in the magazine, ending in 68 chapters and 8 volumes. I understand that reading a cancelled manga isn't really that appealing, but I wouldn't have recommended it if I didn't think it was worth it, and with 8 volumes there's definitely enough here to be enjoyed. Magico tells the story of Emma, a girl who is possessed by the evil echidna, which is a creature said to have the powers to destroy the world. To try to stop this, she is taken by one of the 3 strongest mages of the world, Shion. Shion tells Emma that there is a way to steal the echidna, but it involves a series of rituals called Magico that both of them need to go through together. The first one being a marriage between the 2 of them with the special rings. The rest of the story is a mix of rom-com with battle manga, as the characters alternate from finding materials for the rituals to trying to be wholesome and lovely with each other. It reminds me a bit of Yozakura, or I guess Yozakura reminds me a bit of Magico, with the entire chemistry between the main duo. So if you like that aspect of Yozakura family, I definitely think you will enjoy Magico. With that said, there is enough battle in this battle manga to keep you entertained as well. And that's it. If you read any of these, then please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you have any other lesser known manga that you think I should have mentioned, please do let me know as well, and I might do a follow-up video later down the line. And if you watch it all here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.